They thought Canada would fold under pressure. But what came next, no one saw coming. Instead of retreating, Canada rose. Not with rage, but with strategy. And while Trump tried to break an economy, he accidentally helped build a stronger one. It all began with a microphone and a threat. Standing before cameras, President Donald Trump didn't negotiate. He dictated. By July 9th, he warned the world, "You'll either sign a trade deal, or you'll face devastating tariffs starting August 1st Street." That wasn't diplomacy, that was an ultimatum, and it wasn't just aimed at rivals. Trump targeted allies, friends, neighbors, and one of his biggest targets, Canada. Steel, aluminum, and automotive parts, the backbone of Canadian manufacturing, were suddenly under economic attack. Trump's tariff strategy hit hard and fast, sending waves of uncertainty across North America. In cities like Winnipeg and Toronto, in small towns across Alberta and Quebec, businesses watched contracts freeze. Export pipelines slowed, and manufacturers braced for a collapse. But what Trump didn't realize was that by trying to isolate Canada, he was forcing it to revolve. The numbers came in quickly. According to Statistics Canada, exports to the US, once Canada's dominant trade lane, fell to historic lows. One region, Manitoba, saw a stunning 14.5% decline in exports to the United States. That wasn't just a data point. It was a siren. Canadian businesses were watching decades of North-South trade being unraveled overnight. And yet, that decline sparked something else. Where Trump expected desperation, Canada delivered innovation. Rather than cling to what was lost, Canadian leadership pivoted. Instead of retaliating with fiery speeches or dramatic tariffs of their own, Mark Carney, the quiet economist turned political force, chose a different path. He didn't respond with noise. He responded with structure. Carney launched a new strategy, one built on trade diversification, self-reliance, and long-term vision. Where Trump saw power in dependency, Carney saw weakness. Where Trump played poker, Carney played chess. As US tariffs continued to rise, some as high as 30% on countries like Japan and South Africa, Canada began writing a new playbook. The country didn't just talk about change. It made it happen. Energy infrastructure once pointed south began angling toward Asia and Europe. LNG terminals in British Columbia. Pipeline feasibility studies between Alberta and Ontario. Rail networks that reconnected provinces instead of begging for American permits. Canada was rethinking its very identity. A nation that had spent decades tethered to its southern neighbor was now finding strength in local alliances. Premiers weren't just attending meetings, they were forging internal partnerships. Made in Manitoba and Made in Ontario weren't just campaigns. They became symbols of resistance, of resilience. This wasn't just economic survival, it was economic reinvention. Trump's plan was to pressure Canada into submission, but the pressure had the opposite effect. As the US demanded loyalty through tariffs, Canada began looking elsewhere, intentionally, strategically. New deals were explored in Asia. Trade missions ramped up to Europe. And while the US still received the lion's share of Canadian exports, roughly 70%, that number was no longer stable. It was sliding. Even an 8.5% rise in exports to non-US countries mattered. Not because it replaced American trade volume overnight, but because it signaled that the door was opening. And Canada was walking through it. Carney understood something vital. The first step away from dependency doesn't need to be dramatic. It just needs to be deliberate. Behind closed doors, Carney's administration began rolling out a national vision, one that no longer relied on America's political moods to determine Canada's economic fate. Internal supply chains were strengthened. Manufacturers recalibrated. Provinces began to support each other economically in ways not seen before. A new reality was taking shape, one where Canada was finally treating its own economy as a web of interconnected provinces instead of satellite states orbiting Washington's policies. And while Trump continued to host press conferences filled with bravado, Carney was building something real, an economic immune system. One of the clearest signs of Canada's transformation: energy. Before the tariff wars, 97% of Canada's oil and gas exports went to one country, the United States. That kind of imbalance wasn't just a trade issue, it was a geopolitical liability. Trump knew it, and he used it. But Carney didn't waste time complaining. He acted. Diversification became more than a talking point. It became national policy. LNG development was expanded. Trade routes to Asia were fortified. And European markets, still reeling from energy insecurity after the fallout with Russia, opened the doors wide. For the first time in decades, Canada was treating its energy wealth as a strategic advantage, not a raw resource to be sold at a discount. While the federal government tackled foreign diversification, something else was happening at the ground level. A surge in Canadian economic patriotism. Programs like Made in Manitoba and Made in Ontario began gaining real traction, not just with businesses, but with consumers. People were actively choosing Canadian-made products. Suppliers were building new relationships across provincial lines. For the first time in a generation, Canada was talking to itself, economically. This wasn't isolationism, it was strategic nationalism, and it worked. Canadians weren't turning their backs on the world. They were learning how to stand on their own. Trump's strategy was never really a strategy. It was theater, dramatic, loud, unpredictable, but international trade isn't about fear. It's about consistency. And while Trump played the short game, Carney was investing in the long haul. When the Trump administration rolled out steep tariffs on steel, aluminum, autos, and more, the plan was simple: extract concessions through intimidation. Make countries line up, make them beg. But Canada didn't beg. It planned, it built, it pivoted. And when Carney saw a chance to bring provinces together, not through politics, but through purpose, he seized it. Ontario and Alberta began partnering on major energy projects, including pipelines and trade corridors that would permanently reduce dependency on US infrastructure. No more waiting for Washington's permission. Canada was laying its own tracks. That partnership between Alberta and Ontario wasn't a media event. It was a milestone. Pipelines would connect Alberta's oil fields directly with Ontario's refineries. Rail lines would transport goods internally across the country instead of across borders. Feasibility studies were ordered, supply chains mapped, new financing tools created to support homegrown industry, especially the steel sector. For the first time, Canada was acting like a country that didn't need to be part of someone else's plan. It was writing its own, and Carney's quiet leadership made it happen. Not by shouting, not by shaming, but by guiding. He turned panic into policy, disruption into direction. Economic independence doesn't arrive in a press release. It's built, and that's exactly what Carney's administration began to do: one corridor, one province, one agreement at a time. What Trump viewed as dominance, Canada viewed as a challenge. As the US tried to force compliance through escalating penalties, Canada responded with something more powerful: resilience. Quiet coordination across provinces, infrastructure that served internal needs first, energy projects that didn't ask for approval from foreign capitals. And all of it pointed to one goal: sovereignty through self-reliance. While Trump pitched his drill, baby, drill philosophy to Asia, Carney presented a different offer. Canada had not only the natural resources, but the proximity and stability that Asian nations craved. Where Trump lobbied with pressure, Carney offered reliability. With LNG facilities rising across British Columbia and Quebec, and demand for natural gas projected to soar by 80% by 2050, Canada wasn't just ready to participate in the global energy future. It was positioning itself to lead it. The difference in approach was stark. Trump used energy as a weapon. Carney used it as a bridge. Global demand for natural gas isn't just rising, it's exploding. According to energy analysts at Wood Mackenzie, demand could jump by as much as 80% by 2050. This isn't a forecast that can be ignored. It's the future, written in megawatts and contracts. Canada is already one of the top 5 natural gas producers in the world. But for years, its role was underplayed, not because it lacked supply, but because it lacked direction. Trump believed dominance came from drilling the most oil. Carney believed leadership came from knowing where that oil would go. And more importantly, who would trust you to deliver it. While the US focused on Alaska-based LNG projects, Carney doubled down on Canada's advantage: geography. Ports on Canada's Pacific coast sit closer to Asia than Alaska. That's a fact you can't bluff away. And while Trump courted Japan and South Korea with pressure, Carney courted them with confidence. Infrastructure projects across British Columbia gained real momentum. Terminals weren't just theoretical, they were being built. Trump may have made headlines, but Canada was signing handshakes. What made the Carney doctrine so effective wasn't speed. It was precision. Canada didn't overpromise. It quietly constructed every energy corridor, every rail line, every trade agreement. They weren't just reactions to Trump. They were long-term shifts designed to make Canada future-proof. Trump's version of power was control, issue threats, force concessions, and hope the chaos leads to a win. Carney's version of power was coordination. Build enough internal structure that no foreign disruption could shake it. That difference between spectacle and strategy is what reshaped Canada's trajectory. Trump tried to play kingmaker, but Carney, methodically and without fanfare, was reshaping the board. Trump's tariffs didn't just hit a few industries. They shook the entire country. Steel and aluminum in Ontario, fisheries in British Columbia, agriculture in the prairies, mining in the north. Every corner of Canada felt the blow. This wasn't selective pressure, it was a full-spectrum economic shockwave. But what it triggered was unity. For the first time in years, provinces that rarely collaborated began talking about shared infrastructure, joint supply chains, and mutual resilience. From coast to coast, the message was clear. If we don't build something together, we'll fall apart alone. And Carney made sure they chose the former. He didn't respond with nationalist slogans or symbolic speeches. He responded with quiet empowerment, encouraging provinces to lean on each other instead of a foreign market that had proven too volatile. The movement wasn't loud, but it was everywhere. One of the most pivotal developments came with the Ontario-Alberta partnership. These two provinces, with vastly different political cultures and economic profiles, did something historic. They began working together on a joint economic and energy corridor. It wasn't just about pipelines. It was about rerouting the country's economic bloodstream, using Ontario's steel to build Alberta's infrastructure, linking natural gas in the west to manufacturing capacity in the east. This was more than supply chain planning. It was independence planning. A joint feasibility study was launched to determine the most effective route, financing model, and commercial tools needed to make it happen. No waiting on US approval. No handouts. No more dependency. Carney didn't call it a revolution, but that's exactly what it was. Infrastructure isn't built overnight, but blueprints are powerful. They signal intent. They attract investment. They shift national mindset. That's what this corridor study represented. Not just the physical link between Alberta's resources and Ontario's manufacturing, but the psychological separation from American gatekeeping. For decades, Canada's economic infrastructure was designed around getting goods into the US. Now, under Carney, it was being redesigned to serve Canadians first, and the world next. This wasn't just a shift in logistics. It was a shift in philosophy. And it sent a message far beyond Canada's borders. We can stand on our own. While Trump fired off tweets and speeches filled with ultimatums, Canada's trade associations, policy experts, and provincial governments were quietly stitching together a more resilient economy. It wasn't flashy, but it was lasting. Trade networks once dominated by US pipelines and border crossings were being replaced with domestic alternatives. Suppliers who had never worked with each other before were now building partnerships across provinces. Small steps, yes, but they added up to something real, something permanent. Trump believed in disruption, Carney believed in preparation, and in the end, it was the prep work that gave Canada its new footing. Meanwhile, Canadian consumers were no longer just buyers, they were believers. They understood that economic power wasn't just about GDP numbers. It was about choices, and one of the most powerful choices was buying Canadian. From clothing to produce, from machinery to materials, made in Canada became a quiet act of resistance. Not to isolate, but to reinforce. In Manitoba, Ontario, and other provinces, local programs incentivized buying domestic. And while these movements started small, they sparked a deeper cultural shift. The idea that Canada doesn't need to lean on one partner to survive. It can stand with many, including itself. Carney harnessed that energy. He didn't manufacture it, he nurtured it. Canada has always had the ingredients to become an energy superpower: abundant resources, a skilled workforce, global respect. But for years, it lacked the will. Trump's tariffs changed that. They acted as a catalyst, turning passive potential into active pursuit. Carney saw the opportunity, and more importantly, he understood the stakes. Energy dominance isn't just about exporting gas. It's about securing influence, becoming the reliable partner for countries who no longer trust the unpredictability of American politics. Canada could become that partner. And under Carney's leadership, it began taking that role seriously. Not by shouting louder, but by showing up with steady hands. To be clear, the US wasn't backing down. The Trump administration pushed aggressively for investment in Alaska's massive $44 billion LNG project. They wanted Japan and South Korea on board. But geography isn't on Alaska's side, nor is volatility. While the US tried to compete with size, Carney competed with proximity, reliability, and diplomacy. Asian buyers understood the difference. One path required navigating politics. The other simply required navigating the Pacific. Canada didn't need to win the LNG war overnight. It just needed to show it was serious. And with projects underway, it did. By 2050, the global market for natural gas will look nothing like today. That's not speculation, that's a data-driven reality. And Carney is treating that future like a mission, not a gamble. His government began green-lighting LNG infrastructure from coast to coast. Not just in BC, but across the country, turning Canada into a network of energy ports, each capable of fueling a different region of the world. The Kadamat plant in particular holds massive potential. With the possibility of doubling output, it could serve as a flagship in Canada's new energy arsenal. The question is no longer, can Canada deliver? It's, how fast can it scale? It's easy to forget just how quickly the dominoes fell. One man's tariffs caused a nation to rewrite its economy. And while Trump tried to leverage short-term gain, he accidentally sparked Canada's long-term transformation. Mark Carney never raised his voice. He raised his standards. Factories recalibrated, energy routes recharted, provinces rediscovered each other, and Canada's economic heartbeat shifted inward, then outward again, this time not in dependence, but in strength. This wasn't retaliation, it was evolution, and it wasn't temporary. Trump's legacy in trade diplomacy can be summarized in one word: submission. Make concessions, cut deals, or face punishment. It was economic strong-arming with a flag on top. But Canada, once the polite neighbor that tolerated this, decided enough was enough. No more begging, no more bending, no more waiting for a foreign president to validate Canadian success. Carney's Canada did something Trump never expected. It stopped playing the game entirely and started building its own. Trump's approach left allies feeling cornered. But what he didn't realize is that when you corner a country like Canada, you don't break its spirit. You ignite it. Under Carney, Canada became everything Trump's America was not: diplomatic, not belligerent; stable, not erratic; visionary, not reactive; reliable, not risky. Trump created pressure. Carney created permanence. The difference: one gets headlines, the other gets history. In trying to punish Canada, Trump only pushed it to prepare. In trying to isolate it, he forced it to unify. And in trying to control it, he handed it the greatest gift of all: independence. Not in words, in action. Canada didn't wave a flag and declare freedom. It built railways, it forged steel, it drafted deals, it rewrote maps, and in doing so, it declared something far more powerful: we don't need to be rescued. We've already started to rise.